Count Corla, the Socialist Party, the Anti-Austerity Alliance, People for Profit, doesn't have any illusions in the EU, but I must say it's extremely hilarious to hear people on the other side talking about a completely different EU to what they were talking about a month ago. They're talking about its lack of democracy. So it seems the EU is okay when it's inflicting austerity on the general populace, but it's not okay when it has a lash at a multinational corporation. Now, today we've heard a few defences of the government's decision to pursue this appeal against the judgment. The government is to set up an inquiry into our corporation tax regime, an inquiry, laughably, by the way, that won't question the actual corporation tax rate. That's cordon sanitaire. But the usual suspects of accountants and establishment insiders will conduct this inquiry, not ordinary workers, trade unions, community representatives, etc. It's a very poor return from the presence of the independents in government, and it really does show that people can only rely on the left for a real challenge to this sort of policy. We've also heard scaremongering about job losses. The multinational sector provides 10% of employment in this country. And by the way, it isn't only multinational jobs that have a multiplier effect, which is what some people try to argue. So do public sector jobs, so do other private sector jobs. It is not the case that there's a threat to those jobs because they're making vast profits here off the back of the current policy. So they will not leave on that basis. And if they do, it shows they've no social commitment to this country in the first place and are not a reliable basis for an industrial policy to be based on. I want to take up this key idea that's emerged that, listen, the money isn't ours, we'd get very little of it, it belongs to other people. First of all, the Irish government, and revenue follow the orders of government. Please give us a break. The revenue doesn't make these decisions, they carry out government policy. The Irish government knew Apple was avoiding paying taxes in other countries and shifting vast sums of money into this country. They were, as Joseph Stiglitz said, pretending that the money, the billions of profits, were originating in some Irish company that was registered in cyberspace. That is a ruse, tax avoidance, tax evasion, call it what you will. That's the nub of this. And it's like allowing your house be used for a crime and then pleading innocence. This is now the chickens coming home to roost for Irish corporate tax policy. And if it emerges that ordinary workers and unemployed people in Europe are being fleeced by this policy, I have a problem with that as well. It isn't just the case that we care about citizens in this country. Now, the Anti-Austerity Alliance does not support the idea of defence of our 12.5% corporation tax rate because, number one, it's clearly not being paid anyway and is a work of fiction, but the rate should be substantially increased. The rate was substantially decreased over the years. Tomorrow, Dublin bus workers have to miss a day's pay and the day after striking for a living wage. In 1970, the proportion of GDP that was ascribed to wages was 66%. Today, that figure is 44%. And that's because of corporate tax policy and the policy of having as little tax on the rich and wealthy as possible. Why shouldn't multinationals pay similar rates to what workers pay? That's what we need a discussion about in society. And if you stand over low corporation tax as a policy, you stand over growing inequality in the world. Oxfam reports that the top 50 multinational companies hoard cash in tax havens to the tune of $1.24 trillion. Imagine what that wealth could do if it was invested, if it was owned and controlled by the people who create and toil to produce that wealth. Not the Tim Cooks, the Bill Gates, the Mark Zuckerbergs. By the way, you think they personally toiled in the iPad factories the way we hear some people. Of course, it's very exploited and low-paid workers who do that. But the potential for that wealth, if it was owned and controlled by those who produce it. For example, the poorest countries lose $100 billion because of tax evasion that could provide drinking water for 2.2 billion people. And Apple is top of this list. Apple is the top company sitting on $180 billion in uninvested dollars. What type of society is that? That's why we had the Occupy movement, the movement against globalisation, the anti-austerity movement around Europe. Now, Micheál Martin earlier, and I'll just finish on this, Count Corla, attacked the idea of socialism or any other alternative. We've heard James Connolly quoted a lot today, including by the Labour Party, but James Connolly said, "Socialism is indeed worthy to be entitled the great anti-theft movement of the 20th century and of the 21st century, because what it means is we propose to establish honesty, as he said, once and forever as the basis of our social relations. It's the only alternative to the robbery that's taken place of the poor and workers throughout Europe because of these multinationals."